Hey guys, tonight we begin with something most of us have never truly considered. The medieval peasant, a person who existed in a time and place where you were expected to survive temperatures that would make your thermostat weep, keep your family alive on less food than your average takeout order, maintain a home that's essentially a sophisticated box of cold darkness, and somehow make it all look like this is simply the way life is meant to be lived. Before we dive into this world together, get yourself comfortable. Dim your lights if you haven't already. Find that perfect position where your body doesn't ache quite as much, where your mind can begin to drift away from whatever occupied it today. Take a long, slow breath in through your nose. Hold it for a moment. Now let it escape, gentle and unhurried. That's right. In this moment, you're safe. You're warm. You have heat coming from somewhere, a furnace, a radiator, the sun through your window. But as we journey back together, we're going to walk into a world where heat was something you didn't take for granted. It was something you had to fight for, something you had to earn with your hands, preserve with your ingenuity, and protect with everything you had. The medieval winter wasn't just cold. It wasn't simply a season where the temperature dropped and people wore more clothing. It was something else entirely. It was a slow, creeping threat that didn't just affect your body but fundamentally altered how you thought, how you moved, how you survived. And the peasants, these ordinary people who made up perhaps 80 to 90% of the population, they didn't have castles with stone keeps and massive hearths. They didn't have elaborate systems. They had ingenuity. They had community. They had stubbornness. And they had knowledge passed down through so many generations that it had become as natural as breathing. Please like and subscribe our channel. Pause. We're going to spend the next 2 hours with these people. Not the kings or nobles you've read about in history books. Not the monks who wrote the surviving documents. But the actual humans who woke up in the dark, felt the cold seep through cracks in their walls, and figured out how to not just survive but to maintain their dignity, their families, and their will to see spring again. You're going to meet Thomas, a peasant in the year 1298 in what would become England. You'll know his wife, Eleanor, who spent her days thinking about things most of us never have to consider anymore. And you'll understand what it meant to be their son, James, who was 9 years old and already learning that cold was not an enemy you defeated, but rather something you lived alongside. The thing about medieval peasants is that they weren't stupid. That's perhaps the most important thing to understand before we begin. Modern people often imagine peasants as simple, crude, uncivilized, but they were working with the tools they had. They understood their environment in ways we simply cannot grasp from our temperature-controlled existence. They knew how to read the sky for signs of worse cold coming. They understood which materials held warmth and why. They had mathematics in their hands that they couldn't necessarily express in words, but which worked nonetheless. Pause. As we move deeper into this story, you're going to find yourself relaxing into a rhythm that feels almost hypnotic. That's intentional. The medieval world operated on rhythms too, the rhythm of seasons, of harvest and dormancy, of work and rest. And as we describe the textures of their lives, the sounds of their existence, the weight of their struggles, your mind will begin to settle. Your shoulders, which you might not have even realized were tense, will start to soften. Your breathing will slow naturally, as though your body is responding to the same ancient rhythms that kept these people sane through the endless dark and cold. The peasants called the season from November to March the dark time. Not because it was actually dark 24 hours a day, though in northern regions it sometimes felt that way, but because it was a darkness of the soul. It was when death was a real possibility. It was when the careful stores you preserved all summer and autumn were at their lowest. It was when heat and light became precious commodities that had to be rationed like a lord's gold. But here's something that might surprise you. The peasants actually understood something about winter that we've mostly forgotten. They understood that there was a rhythm to it, that if you prepared correctly, if you paid attention to the signs, if you worked together as a community, you could not just survive it but even find moments of beauty within it. The first snow that fell on a cold November morning, yes, it meant more work, but it also meant something else. It meant the land was sleeping. It meant there was a kind of peace that came with the cessation of constant labor in the fields. Pause. Let your thoughts begin to drift now. The way smoke from a peasant fire drifts up through the thatch and disappears into the vast sky above. We're going to walk through a medieval winter together. And as we do, you're going to find yourself understanding not just how these people survived, but why they mattered and perhaps, in some small way, what we've lost by forgetting how to live with the seasons rather than against them. The night is long. The story is long. And there is no need to hurry. Close your eyes if you wish, or keep them open and unfocused, letting the words wash over you like the cool darkness of evening settling over a cold earth. We begin now, not with fanfare or excitement, but with the sound of wind moving across a landscape 800 years in the past. And in that landscape, a family is preparing for the long night ahead. You wake. The room is dark. Not the darkness of a modern bedroom at night, with the ambient light from your phone, the small LEDs on electronics, the glow from outside. This is a different kind of dark. This is the dark that existed for thousands of years before electricity. This is a dark where you cannot see your hand in front of your face, even though you hold your hand directly in front of your eyes. The first thing you notice is not light but cold. The cold is the smell of it, the bitter, mineral quality that ancient air has. The air that has been inside this space for hours without moving, air that has absorbed the moisture from human breath and turned it into something slightly damp despite how freezing it is. You lie on a straw mattress that has been placed over a wooden platform. The straw is old, probably several seasons old, and it is compressed into something that feels more like stone than like a bed. There is a blanket over you, made of wool that is scratchy and somewhat thin, woven by hands that did the best they could with the resources available. Your body is shaking, not violently, but with a deep, systemic tremor that starts in your core and radiates outward. This is November in the Midlands, and the year is 1298. You are Thomas. You are 34 years old, which is not particularly old by any standard except that the average life expectancy in this time is around 35 years, which means you are not young anymore. Your hands are scarred from years of work. Your back carries a permanent ache from a time you fell from a roof while helping repair the Lord's barn. It was an accident, and the Lord did not pay your healer's bills, so you simply learned to live with the pain. Pause. Next to you, Eleanor stays. Her breath comes in small clouds that you can almost see in the deep darkness, though perhaps you're imagining it. Eleanor is your wife of 16 years. You married when you were both very young. She was 14. You were 18, which is not unusual. She has given you 6 children, 3 of whom survived adulthood, which is a devastating statistic that feels completely normal to you because it is the only life you've ever known. Her breathing becomes more regular. She is not sleeping anymore, but she is still lying down, still gathered under her own blanket, still gathering herself for what the day requires. The cold came deep last night, Eleanor says. Her voice is hoarse from the dryness of the air and the slight cough she's had since early October. She's not complaining. People don't complain about temperature in this time. It would be like complaining about rain or darkness or hunger. These are simply the conditions under which life occurs. But you notice something in her voice that troubles you. There's a weightiness to it, a fatigue that seems to go beyond the normal tiredness of morning. Yes, you say. You do not move yet. There is a moment, always, between waking and fully accepting that you must move, must get up, must begin the day. It is a brief moment of stillness that you've learned to cherish. Worse than yesterday. From the other side of the small room, in a space barely large enough to fit another sleeping platform, comes a voice. Father, I'm cold. This is James, your youngest surviving child, 9 years old. He has always been thin, and this time of year his ribs become visible in a way that worries you deeply but which you cannot discuss with anyone because there is no solution to his thinness except to wait for the food stores to increase in spring, which is months away. Eleanor shifts, and you hear the straw mattress beneath her crinkle and compress. Come here, she says to James, and there is movement in the darkness as a boy gathers his thin blanket and pads across the cold floor. Your feet can hear the cold and the sound his footsteps make on the packed earth that serves as your floor, to climb into the slightly larger bed you share with Eleanor. This is survival in its most elemental form. Heat is currency. Heat is life. And right now, Eleanor is being both mother and furnace, keeping the boy from the worst of the cold. You understand this without words. You've lived this your entire life. The body heat of another person is more valuable than gold in winter. Sharing warmth is not a luxury. It's a system that has been refined over centuries of human practice, passed down through your own family from ancestors you've never met but whose knowledge lives in your hands, in your reflexes, in the way you understand the world. Pause. This is the beginning of a medieval winter's day. There is no alarm clock. There is no gradually brightening window or phone buzzing with notifications. There is simply cold and darkness and the necessity of movement. You know that the sun is not yet up. You know this because your body understands time in ways that modern humans have largely forgotten. You've internalized a rhythm of seasons enough to know that dawn is still perhaps 2 hours away, maybe more. In November, the day doesn't truly arrive until nearly 8 in the morning. But you cannot wait for the dawn. There is work to do. There is always work to do, even in winter, perhaps especially in winter. You've learned, through all your years, that winter is not a time of rest. Winter is a time of constant, careful maintenance. One day of neglect can cascade into disaster. You sit up slowly. Your back protests with a sharp pain that makes you close your eyes for a moment. This pain is old. You know every inch of it. You know which movements make it worse, which positions offer relief. You know how to function despite it, which is what life has taught you to do. Function, persist, continue. You touch the ground beside your bed where you place your tunic and your outer clothing before you slept. The cloth is stiff with cold and dampness. You have no modern heater to warm your clothes, no dryer to fluff them. What you have is your body heat and the knowledge that you must put these clothes on regardless of how cold they are, because without them, the cold outside is unbearable in a way that would stop your heart within minutes of exposure. The tunic goes on first. It's made of wool. Linen is too cold in winter, and it's dyed a muddy brown because that is a color most things end up being after years of wear. Over the tunic goes a kind of outer garment, looser, with longer sleeves. Over that goes a coat made of heavier wool, filled in parts with straw for insulation. This is not fashion. This is layering, a strategy that you don't think about consciously because your parents taught you the same layering, and their parents taught them, back and back through generations of human survival in cold climates. You wrap a cloth around your feet. You cannot afford shoes for everyone, and shoes are more likely to be worn by your feet in spring and summer when you need to work in the fields and your soles might cut on stones. In winter, cloth wrapped carefully around your feet works nearly as well, and cloth can be washed and rewrapped when it becomes too worn. The wrapping is not random. There is a technique to it, a way that prevents cold air from seeping in around your toes and ankles. You learned this as a child and have never questioned it. Pause. As you dress, you're aware that you're moving in cold that seems to penetrate even the laid wool. This is what happens as winter deepens. The cold becomes so complete, so total, that it stops feeling cold in the traditional sense. It becomes normal. It becomes a baseline against which all sensation is measured. Your fingers will be cold, but they'll always be cold now, so coldness becomes merely one of many sensations rather than something remarkable. Your toes will be numb, not painfully numb, because pain requires sensation, and sensation has mostly left them, but simply absent from your conscious experience. This is a reality that medieval peasants understood. There was a rhythm to adaptation. Your body would change. You would learn to function despite conditions that would be unbearable for short periods. But the cost of this adaptation was paid in ways that accumulated slowly, almost invisibly. Eleanor is holding James close to her now, his small body generating precious heat against her warmth. You can see the outline of them in the deep darkness, a shape of human comfort that has been the same since before written history. This is what keeps people alive through medieval winters. Not the elaborate systems of modern civilization, but the simple willingness to share warmth, to hold close, to trade the comfort of distance for the necessity of survival. Eleanor has been thinner recently. You've noticed, though you haven't spoken about it. Women lose weight in winter. This is expected, but she seems to be losing it faster than she should. And there's the cough. The cough that started in October and hasn't left. It might be nothing. It might be something serious. There's no way to know, and no point in dwelling on it when there's nothing you can do except ensure she stays warm, stays fed to the best of your ability, and avoid additional stress or exposure. What you don't fully realize, what your conscious mind hasn't articulated, is that Eleanor has actually developed a mild infection in her lungs. Her body is fighting it, and the fight is using significant energy, which is part of why she's been losing weight so rapidly. By January, this infection will have either resolved itself or become serious enough that she might actually die from it. The uncertainty of that hangs in the air around her, not acknowledged but felt. You move toward the door of the cottage, feeling your way. Your feet know this path perfectly. You could walk it in complete darkness and never bump into anything. And indeed, you often do exactly that. The door is made of wooden planks fitted together and held in place by a wooden frame. It opens inward, and the first thing that hits you is a shock of cold that is genuinely colder than the cold inside. It's as though the darkness outside has weight to it, a presence that pushes against you. The wind is coming from the northeast, carrying with it the kind of cold that comes from vast empty distances, the cold that has traveled all the way from the North Sea and beyond, gathering itself into something sharp and biting. You breathe, and your breath formed clouds that dissipate immediately into the night air. The ground beneath your cloth-wrapped feet is hard, frozen from several nights of killing frost. You can feel the crystallized grass, the way the earth has become solid rather than yielding. Winter has truly begun. In front of your cottage is a small yard, and in that yard are the things that must be tended to, the work that never truly stops. There is a small animal pen where you keep chickens and sometimes a pig, depending on what you can afford to feed through the winter. There is a small garden space where you grew vegetables in the autumn, most of which have been harvested and are now stored in the cottage. There are water buckets that must be refilled from the stream, though the stream is beginning to freeze at its edges, which means the water is becoming harder to access. Pause. You move to the water buckets. There are 3 of them, made of wooden staves held together with iron bands. You've had these buckets for 9 years, which means they are quite valuable, and you take care of them accordingly. The water inside has a thin layer of ice forming on top, and you have to break this with a stick to get to the liquid water beneath. The process is quieter than you might expect. The ice gives way with a soft crunching sound rather than a loud crack. This is the work of winter. This is not the dramatic work of plowing fields or harvesting grain. This is a tedious, repetitive work of maintaining the basic conditions of existence. You fill your bucket with the coldest water you've encountered so far. Your hands have become numb in approximately 30 seconds. This is not a problem. You've learned not to think about pain from cold because the pain will pass once your hands warm up again, and dwelling on it only makes the cold feel worse. You carry the bucket back inside, setting it on a wooden stand near what serves as your hearth. The hearth is a central area of the cottage where you have permission to maintain a fire. The fire is not burning right now. Fires in cottages are put out at night because they are fire hazards, and a cottage fire will be catastrophic in a way that few modern people can fully appreciate. You live communally in many ways, and your neighbors would suffer from your house catching fire. Next to the cold hearth sits your fire-starting equipment, a flint and steel, and underneath them, some very carefully prepared tinder, the finest, driest straw, mixed with something called tinder fungus that you or Eleanor spent several autumn evenings gathering and drying. You strike the flint and steel together, and sparks fall onto the tinder. It takes perhaps 15 strikes before the tinder ignites with a small, reluctant flame that looks impossibly fragile in the darkness. You lean down, and very carefully, using technique that has been refined over centuries of human practice, you transfer this flame to a small bundle of twigs that you prepared. The twigs catch, and now you have a flame that is somewhat larger, somewhat more stable. You feed this flame with slightly larger pieces of wood, and the fire grows. This process, which takes perhaps 5 minutes from spark to functional flame, is one of the most critical tasks of the day. Lose this fire, and you will have to start over from scratch, which means striking flint and steel repeatedly, which means your hands will become even colder, which means you might use up your tinder, which means you might need to borrow fire from a neighbor, which means the entire village will know that you were careless. You don't lose a fire. The fire builds to a size where it is genuinely warm to stand next to. Heat radiates from it in a way that makes you realize how cold your body actually is. You position yourself near the fire, warming your hands, letting sensation return to your fingers. In these quiet minutes, alone except for your sleeping family, the profound nature of what you do becomes apparent. You are literally maintaining the fire that keeps your family alive. Without this fire, the cold would penetrate the cottage completely. Without this warmth, Eleanor's cough might become pneumonia, might become something worse. Without this heat, James's small body would have no refuge from the exterior cold. And without this fire, the stored food cannot be cooked, cannot be transformed into the calories needed to survive until spring. It's a small action, really. Check the fire, add wood, let it build, but it's also the action that determines whether your family lives or dies. It's the action repeated not just once but many times per night, many times per day, for months at a time. This is medieval survival at its most fundamental level. Pause. Eleanor has gotten up now, bringing James with her. The boy has wrapped his thin blanket around his shoulders, and his eyes are still half closed with sleep. Eleanor sets about the morning work while you continue to warm yourself. She moves to the bucket of water you filled and begins to prepare something to eat. Food in winter is always an exercise in compromise. You have some bread that was baked during the autumn, but it's now quite hard and somewhat moldy, though you cut away the worst of the mold. You have some dried peas that were soaked in the water you heated last night. Though Eleanor is not happy about the fuel cost of heating water, every scrap of wood is precious, and fire is warmth that is necessary for survival, but also warmth that could be used to cook. She makes a kind of thin gruel by adding the soaked peas to hot water and letting them warm through. It's not hearty. It's not the kind of breakfast that would make anyone say they are truly satisfied. But it is food, and it is warm, and both of these things matter enormously. This gruel represents rationing in its most practical form. In summer, Eleanor might make a hearty pottage with fresh vegetables and herbs. In winter, she's doing the best she can with stored goods and minimal heat. James's situation concerns you both, though you don't discuss it explicitly. The boy is young, and young bodies are remarkably resilient, but is also young, which means his growth is important, which means his nutritional needs are slightly higher than they would be for an adult. Thomas and Eleanor have been rationing carefully, which is right and proper, but the rationing means that James is being underfed even relative to the small amounts being eaten by everyone else in the household. This will have consequences that won't become apparent for weeks or months. James won't develop full scurvy. That's a disease that requires specific deficiencies that are less common in medieval diet than people sometimes think. But he will have a kind of general weakening, a slightly lowered resistance to the colds and flus that are common in winter. If one of these infections takes hold, he might become seriously ill in a way that a better-fed child might not. This is the invisible casualty of medieval winter that rarely gets mentioned in history books. Not the people who die of dramatic freezing or complete starvation, but the people who are chronically underwell, who exist in a state of partial malnutrition, who have infections that linger because their bodies don't have the reserves to fully fight them off. As the fire stabilizes, you take your next action. You move to a corner of the cottage where you keep the tools of your trade. You are not primarily a farmer. Most peasants have multiple roles depending on the season and their specific skills. You are a thatcher by training, which means in autumn and spring, when repairs to thatched roofs are most urgent, you are busy with that work. But in winter, like most people in this time, you do what work you can find. Right now, in early November, you have been assigned to help repair and maintain some of the buildings on the Lord's manor. This means you need your tools, a hammer made by the village blacksmith, with a head of iron and a wooden handle that has been worn smooth by your hands over the years. You have a saw, also made by the blacksmith and similarly worn. You have a kind of axe, smaller than a full-size woodman's axe, but sufficient for the work you do. You have various chisels and wooden implements designed for shaping and fitting. These tools are precious. A full set of tools represents an investment of time and resources that is almost impossible to comprehend by modern standards. The blacksmith charged you in labor and goods, and you've been paying off the cost for years. You maintain these tools carefully, cleaning them after use, storing them in a dry place, checking them regularly for damage. This morning, you don't immediately need them. You won't be working on the Lord's buildings today, but you have a different project in mind. You have noticed that the thatch on your cottage has developed a small leak near the east corner where water has been dripping into the cottage during heavy rains. Thatch is supposed to be waterproof. That's rather the whole point of thatch. But thatch ages and settles and sometimes needs repair. You pick through your stored bundles of reed, checking the quality. Good thatch reed is a prized material. It's collected from marshes and dried, and it lasts longer than straw. You have a smaller bundle that you're saving for exactly this kind of repair, and you select some of the best pieces. This is work that requires no heat except from your own body, so you can do it even on the coldest days. Pause. You move outside, buckling on a simple leather belt that allows you to attach the climbing equipment you'll need. The morning is still entirely dark, and it will be for another hour or so, but you've learned to work in darkness. You have worked at night, by firelight and moonlight, since you were a child. You climb to the roof of your cottage using a series of wooden steps that you've built into the wall and a kind of rope ladder that you can attach to the roof's edge. This sounds dangerous, and it is, but you've been doing it for so long that your body performs the actions automatically. On the roof, sitting on the steep incline of thatch that protects you from the elements, you work by touch more than by sight. Your hands know what they're doing. You test the thatch, feeling for the areas where it is compressed or deteriorated. You locate the small area where water has been penetrating and begin the work of removing the damaged sections. The thatch comes away in small bundles, revealing the wooden structure beneath. This structure is made of hazel or willow rods, bent and tied into place with twisted plant matter. It's a system that has worked for over 1,000 years. Nothing here is random. Everything has a purpose and a place. You work methodically, removing the damaged thatch and the old binding material. Your hands are cold, but the work generates heat and keeps you warm. You fall into a rhythm, remove old thatch, clear the binding, place new bundles, begin the binding process with new plant material that Eleanor has prepared for just this purpose. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Lift, remove, clear, place, bind. Lift, remove, clear, place, bind. This is where knowledge lives. Not in your conscious mind, but in your hands. Your hands understand thatch in ways that your words never could. When you were 10 years old, your father brought you to a roof that needed repair. He showed you the damage, pointed out where water had penetrated. You see here, your father had said, his voice not unkind but certainly not warm. This is what happens when thatch gets old. It settles. It gets thin. And when it gets thin, water finds its way through. Your job is to understand how water finds its way through. Think about water. What does it do? You'd thought about it. You were smart enough even then to understand that your father wouldn't ask a question unless he wanted you to think hard about the answer. It goes down, you'd said finally. It always goes down. Right. Water always wants to go down. That's the key to understanding thatch. Every layer you put on needs to be steep enough that water runs off it instead of sitting on it. Every piece of reed needs to overlap with the piece below it. So water that comes down hits the top piece, can't get through it, runs down the side of it, and hits the piece below it. It's not magic. It's just understanding how water moves and working with that instead of against it. You'd learn thatch slowly, and mostly through failure. You'd place thatch incorrectly and then watched as rain proved you wrong. You'd bound thatch too loosely and watched it slip out of place in the wind. You'd been frustrated and angry, often, at how difficult something that looked so simple actually was. Your father had watched you learn with the patience of someone who had learned the same things the same way. He didn't comfort you when you failed, but he also didn't mock you. He simply showed you again and again until the knowledge was in your hands rather than just in your head. Pause. The older villagers used to have a saying, knowledge is in the hands. And it's true. You can understand thatch intellectually, can know that water must run down and pieces must overlap. But that knowledge only becomes useful when your hands understand it, when they move automatically into the correct positions, when you can feel whether something is right before you consciously think about whether it's right. Your apprenticeship to thatch work lasted roughly from age 10 until age 14, at which point you were considered proficient enough to do most of the work independently. There were still things you learned afterward. Special techniques at difficult angles, ways to repair without removing all the thatch, but the basics were solidified by 14. You remember a specific failure that shaped you more than most successes. You were 14, and you were working with your father on a roof that needed extensive repair. You'd been assigned to bundle and prepare new thatch reed while your father worked on the actual installation. But you'd gotten impatient. You'd prepared thatch bundles. Yes, but you'd rushed through the preparation, not taking care to align the reed properly or to make sure the bundles were the right thickness. Your father didn't say anything as he worked through the day. But as he continued, his frustration became visible in the way he moved, in the way he'd sometimes have to undo the work you prepared and redo it himself. Finally, he stopped work entirely. He looked at your bundled thatch, then at you. "This won't do," he'd said. "Look at it. Really look at it." You looked, and suddenly you could see what he meant. The bundles were uneven. Some were too thick, some too thin. The reed wasn't aligned well. It was the work of someone rushing, not the work of someone trying to do the job right. If I put this on a roof, it will look wrong, your father continued. And a roof that looks wrong means people looking at it will assume it is wrong, even if it works. And Weiss, I will know that it's wrong, and that knowledge will bother me every time I look at it for the next 10 years. He'd made you redo every single bundle you'd prepared that day. It had taken hours longer than it should have, and you'd been angry at him for making you redo it, angry at yourself for not doing it right the first time. But the lesson had stuck. You'd learned that doing something right meant taking your time, meant being careful even when no one was watching, meant understanding that the quality of your work mattered not because anyone was grading you, but because you had to live with it, because your name was attached to it, because it represented your skill and your integrity. Now, on your roof in the dark, working on this repair that only you will know the full quality of, you apply that lesson. You're careful. You take your time. You make sure the new thatch is properly bound, properly positioned, properly angled so that water will do exactly what it's supposed to do, run down and away from your home. Below, in the cottage, Eleanor is continuing her own work. She's cleaned what can be cleaned with cold water, which is not much, truly, as cold water doesn't dissolve dirt very well, and she's begun preparations for the day's main meal. This will likely be made in the evening, when there is time and when the fire has warmed up sufficiently to cook something more substantial. She has also begun to work on cloth. Eleanor spins wool in the winter, transforming fleece into thread that can be knitted or woven. She has a small spinning wheel, a kind of miracle of engineering that allows her to produce thread much more efficiently than hand spinning. The spinning wheel is relatively new to people like Eleanor, perhaps 100 years old in terms of wide adoption, and it has transformed the work of creating cloth. She sits near the fire, her hands moving in the rhythm that has become second nature to her. The wool feeds onto the wheel, twists as the wheel turns, and comes out as thread. She can do this work nearly without thinking, which is important because thinking is a luxury she doesn't often have. While she spins, she can listen to James, can listen for sounds from the village, can think about what needs to be done next, can worry about whether Eleanor is getting enough to eat. No, Eleanor is you. She is thinking about whether you are getting enough to eat, and whether James is growing properly, and whether the infection in her own lungs will resolve or become something worse. James is eating his small portion of gruel, not with enthusiasm. Children in winter are always hungry, always want more than the rationing allows, but with resigned acceptance. He has been watching his father work on the roof, watching the way your silhouette moved against the growing light in the eastern sky, understanding without being told that this is what you do. You fix things. You maintain things. You keep the boundaries between safety and danger intact. Pause. This is how knowledge is passed down, not through formal instruction, but through doing and failing and being shown again, until the knowledge is in the hands, until it becomes natural, until you cannot imagine not knowing how to do this thing that was once so impossible. James is learning about cold, learning about hunger, learning about work, learning about community. These lessons will shape him in ways that modern children rarely experience. He will know, with a certainty that cannot be erased, that survival requires effort, that community matters, that preparation and care prevent disaster. On the roof, as the sky gradually shifts from black to deep blue to something that might eventually become light, you finish the binding of the new thatch. You step back, carefully, as the roof is steep and the fall will be serious, and survey your work. The patched area is not perfect. A skilled thatcher would probably notice a variation in how the thatch lies and how it's being bound, but it will keep the water out, and that is the point of the exercise. It will protect your family from one more threat. It will maintain the boundary between the cold world outside and the small space of relative safety within. The new morning is arriving now, not dramatically but gradually, the way mornings always arrive. You can see the roof lines of neighboring cottages becoming visible. You can see smoke rising from their chimneys, those cottages with proper chimneys, or more commonly, smoke simply seeping out through thatch. You can see the field beyond the village, frost white in the early light, waiting for spring. You gather your tools, secure the roof, and make your way back down to ground level. Your muscles are stiff, not from exertion but from cold. Cold stiffens everything. Muscle, joint, and bone seem to slow down in the cold. Your movements become careful and deliberate because fast movements can cause injury when your body is this rigid. Eleanor has a warm drink ready for you when you enter the cottage. Water heated with some herbs that she's prepared, an attempt to ease a cough that has been persistent for weeks. It tastes slightly bitter, slightly medicinal, and you consume it without complaint. Medical knowledge in this time is a mixture of actual efficacy and ritual, but the warmth is genuinely helpful regardless of the herb's specific properties. By midday, you are exhausted in a way that is not quite physical. Your body still has energy. The work you've done so far has been moderate, but your mind is tired from the constant attention required to maintain your small cottage, to think about the upcoming months, to prepare for the deeper cold that is certainly coming. Eleanor's cough has gotten worse. She's been trying to hide it, but you can hear it, especially when she's near the smoke of the fire. The smoke bothers her. It bothers everyone, truly, but some people seem more susceptible to its irritating effects, and the cough keeps returning. The smoke in medieval cottages is a constant irritant. There is no chimney to draw it up and out. Instead, smoke drifts through the thatch, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a sudden draft that makes you cough. "We should make more of the herb tea," you say to her, watching her cough into her sleeve for the third time in as many minutes. "We will when we need to," Eleanor responds. But you notice she doesn't sound confident. The herbs are preserved, carefully gathered and dried, but they are also a resource to be managed. If Eleanor is coughing heavily all the way through January, the stored herbs might run out before the season ends and fresh ones can be gathered. Pause. This is the calculus of medieval winter. Everything is rationed. Heat, food, herbs, even water becomes something to be managed carefully because the work of fetching water is itself costly in energy and time. Every resource is balanced against every other resource. Use too much firewood keeping warm, and you will have less available for cooking. Use too many herbs treating Eleanor's cough, and you will have none left if someone gets truly ill, and winter illness is something that can kill. You notice James limping slightly when he moves. His feet have been bothering him. The wrap cloth doesn't provide as much protection as shoes would, but the wrap cloth is what you have. You make a mental note to check his feet more carefully, to make sure the wrapping is holding and that he hasn't developed any blisters or cuts that could become infected. Infection is a real danger in this time. A small cut that would be inconvenient in the modern world can become life-threatening when your body is already stressed by cold and malnutrition. Physical pain is simply something you've learned to live with. Your back aches constantly. That fall from the roof years ago did permanent damage that never fully healed. Your hands are scarred and calloused, the joints somewhat stiff even now, in late autumn. The cold makes everything hurt worse. Cold stiffens already damaged joints, makes old injuries throb, transforms minor discomfort into something that occupies your thoughts more than you'd like. Eleanor has mentioned several times that her joints hurt. She's 36 years old, which is actually older than you, and the years of labor have taken their toll. Arthritis is starting to affect her hands. She can still do her spinning work, but she sometimes has to stop and rest, warming her hands by the fire before she can continue. Some mornings, she struggles to get out of bed because the stiffness is so severe. These are the things that don't get written into history books. The kings and lords might have their glorious battles recorded, but the persistent, grinding physical pain of the common person goes largely unremarked. And yet it shapes life entirely. The roof repair you completed is not a grand achievement. History books won't mention it. The lord of the manor won't hear about it. And yet, it matters immensely. That repair, modest though it may be, prevents water damage that could rot the wooden structure of your cottage, which could eventually cause the entire building to deteriorate to the point where it becomes uninhabitable. In a world without landlords who provide housing maintenance, where your home is your responsibility and the responsibility of your family, this small repair is an investment in your continued survival. This is true of so much of what peasants did during the medieval period. The work was not glamorous. There were no great monuments being built, no cathedrals rising from the labor of these specific hands, though peasants did contribute their labor to cathedral building in many places. The work was functional. It was about maintaining what already existed, about preserving the basic conditions that allowed life to continue. But there is something else worth understanding, something that shifts when you recognize it. Each small repair, each maintained tool, each carefully rationed meal was part of a larger system that had evolved over centuries. The peasants were not primitive people with primitive solutions. They were the inheritors of a vast accumulated knowledge that had been refined and tested through countless winters. Your cottage thatch is the same system used in Denmark and in southern France. The way you layered your clothes is the same layering system used across all of Northern Europe. The rhythm of your work follows the rhythms of agricultural society that had been established when Rome still had an empire. That roof repair is part of something larger, the survival of your family, which is part of the survival of the village, which is part of the survival of your lord's holdings, which is part of the survival of the entire medieval world. Remove any of these pieces, and the whole system becomes fragile. Pause. Consider the broader outputs of peasant labor in winter. You are not manufacturing anything new, not creating surplus to trade, not building anything that will last 1,000 years. But you are maintaining conditions of survival. You are ensuring that the animals in your pen have shelter. You are ensuring that the stored food remain protected from vermin and weather. You are ensuring that the structures you live in will stand through another season. Eleanor's spinning is similarly functional. That thread she produces will eventually become cloth, either through her own weaving or through trade with someone else. That cloth has multiple purposes. It becomes clothing, which is essential for survival. It becomes containers for food. It becomes material for binding tools and securing building materials. The thread she produces today will likely outlast her, will continue to be used and repurposed and eventually worn so thin it becomes scraps, which will be used for something else. There is almost nothing in a medieval peasant's life that is created with the intention of it being discarded. Everything is used until it simply cannot be used anymore. And then everything is recycled into something else. Old cloth becomes rags for cleaning, becomes stuffing for winter clothing, becomes material for binding, becomes scraps that might eventually serve some other purpose. Metal tools are so precious that they are handed down through generations. Wooden implements are repaired again and again until the repair is more the implement than the original. But there's also something deeper here, something that speaks to the human need for creating meaning and beauty even in the context of survival. In the early afternoon, after the morning's essential work is complete, Eleanor brings out a piece of cloth that she's been preparing. It's linen, rare and precious, and she has begun to decorate it with embroidery. The embroidery is not necessary for survival. It serves no functional purpose beyond being admired. But there is something deeply human about the desire to make the things around you beautiful, even when those things also need to be practical. She sits by the fire, her needle moving in careful, controlled motions, creating patterns that will last as long as the cloth itself. These patterns serve no purpose except to be seen and appreciated, and yet they are not frivolous. They are an expression of something important in the human spirit. The need to create beauty, to make something that is not strictly necessary, to put love and care into objects that will be used by people you love. That's lovely, you say to her, watching the pattern develop. You don't spend a lot of time engaging in conversation, but this moment, sitting by the fire, watching your wife create something beautiful while your son plays with scraps of wood on the floor, feels important enough to acknowledge. Eleanor doesn't look up from her work. It's for James's mother, she says. James's mother is Eleanor. She's referring to herself in the third person, as she sometimes does when she's focusing on her work. When he's older, he'll remember his mother made this for him. This is perhaps the most important output of all, the thing that gets lost in discussions of medieval poverty and hardship. Eleanor is creating something that carries love. She's creating an object that will remind her son, years from now, that he was cared for, that someone spent time making something beautiful specifically for him, that he was valued enough to invest in that way. And this connects to something broader. All of the work you do, all the repairing and maintaining and rationing and planning, it's not actually just about survival in the bare sense. It's about maintaining a life with family, with community, with small moments of beauty and connection. Earlier this day, before the sun rose fully, you were working on your roof in the cold and dark. It would have been easy for that work to feel meaningless, just one more task in an endless series of tasks. But it wasn't meaningless. It was part of maintaining your home, which is part of maintaining the space where Eleanor creates beauty with her needle, where James plays safely, where your family gathers around a fire to share warmth. The people in the nearby cottages are engaged in similar work. The blacksmith, William, is maintaining his tools and his space. The miller is keeping his mill functioning. The priest is maintaining the church. The Lord is maintaining his manor. All of these individual efforts are part of a larger system that has evolved over centuries to ensure human survival in conditions that are fundamentally hostile to human comfort. This is the output of peasant labor in winter, not monuments, but lives, not grand achievements, but survival with dignity, not immortal legacy, but the legacy of knowing that someone cared enough to maintain what they had, to repair what broke, to continue creating meaning even in the hardest season. Pause. By the time you've watched Eleanor work for a few minutes, warming yourself by the fire, the next phase of the day is approaching. The morning work is complete. The afternoon will bring new tasks. There's always work. This is an unvarying truth of peasant life. But in this moment, there is warmth and relative comfort, and that is enough. You were 9 years old once, just like James is now. You remember the feeling of that age, old enough to begin truly contributing to the family's survival, young enough to make constant mistakes that frustrated the adults around you. Your father was not a gentle teacher. That wasn't the norm in your time. Gentleness was considered a soft approach, something that might make you weak. But as you think about James now, you understand something your father probably understood as well, that the harsh teaching was not about cruelty. It was about love. It was about preparing you for a world where mistakes could kill you, where not understanding how fire works could mean your family froze to death, where not learning a skill could mean starvation. You remember the winter when you were 10 years old, when your father began teaching you to thatch seriously, not just helping but actually learning the techniques that would be your trade. You'd climbed a roof before, but never to do anything important. That winter, your father brought you up to a section of roof that needed repair, and he pointed out the damage, areas where the thatch had compressed, where water had begun to seep through. "You see here," your father had said, his voice not unkind but certainly not warm. "This is what happens when thatch gets old. It settles. It gets thin. And when it gets thin, water finds its way through. Your job is to understand how water finds its way through. Think about water. What does it do?" You'd thought about it. You were smart enough even then to understand that your father wouldn't ask a question unless he wanted you to think hard about the answer. "It goes down," you'd said finally. "It always goes down." Right. Water always wants to go down. That's the key to understanding thatch. Every layer you put on needs to be steep enough that water runs off it instead of sitting on it. Every piece of reed needs to overlap with the piece below it. So water that comes down hits the top piece, can't get through it, runs down the side of it, and hits the piece below it. It's not magic. It's just understanding how water moves and working with that instead of against it. You'd learn thatch slowly, and mostly through failure. You'd place thatch incorrectly and then watch as rain proved you wrong. You'd bound thatch too loosely and watch it slip out of place in the wind. You'd been frustrated and angry, often, at how difficult something that looked so simple actually was. Your father had watched you learn with the patience of someone who had learned the same things the same way. He didn't comfort you when you failed, but he also didn't mock you. He simply showed you again and again until the knowledge was in your hands rather than just in your head. The older villagers used to have a saying, "Knowledge is in the hands." And it's true. You can understand thatch intellectually, can know that water must run down and pieces must overlap. But that knowledge only becomes useful when your hands understand it, when they move automatically into the correct positions, when you can feel whether something is right before you consciously think about whether it's right. Your apprenticeship to thatch work lasted roughly from age 10 until age 14, at which point you were considered proficient enough to do most of the work independently. There were still things you learned afterward. Special techniques at difficult angles, ways to repair without removing all the thatch, but the basics were solidified by 14. But thatch was not the only thing you had to learn. You had to learn to farm, to work in fields that belonged to your lord, to understand what a good crop looked like and how to encourage it. You had to learn to care for animals. You had to learn to fight, after a fashion, because the lord sometimes required his peasants to serve in a militia for defense. You had to learn to read the signs of weather, to know when to plant and when to harvest and when to prepare for bad weather. Most importantly, you had to learn patience. You had to learn that most things in life cannot be rushed, that forcing something usually makes it worse, that sometimes the best action is to wait and observe and learn before acting. This was perhaps the hardest thing to learn, especially for a young person burning with energy and the desire to prove yourself useful. Pause. The failure that shaped you most came when you were 14. You were working with your father on a roof that needed extensive repair. You'd been assigned to bundle and prepare new thatch reed while your father worked on the actual installation. But you'd gotten impatient. You'd prepared thatch bundles. Yes, but you'd rushed through the preparation, not taking care to align the reed properly or to make sure the bundles were the right thickness. Your father didn't say anything as he worked through the day, but as he continued, his frustration became visible in the way he moved, in the way he'd sometimes have to undo the work you prepared and redo it himself. Finally, he stopped work entirely. He looked at your bundled thatch, then at you. "This won't do," he'd said. "Look at it. Really look at it." You looked, and suddenly you could see what he meant. The bundles were uneven. Some were too thick, some too thin. The reed wasn't aligned well. It was the work of someone rushing, not the work of someone trying to do the job right. "If I put this on a roof, it will look wrong," your father continued. "And a roof that looks wrong means people looking at it will assume it is wrong, even if it works. And Weiss, I will know that it's wrong, and that knowledge will bother me every time I look at it for the next 10 years. He'd made you redo every single bundle you prepared that day. It had taken hours longer than it should have, and you'd been angry at him for making you redo it, angry at yourself for not doing it right the first time. But the lesson had stuck. You'd learned that doing something right meant taking your time, meant being careful even when no one was watching, meant understanding that the quality of your work mattered not because anyone was grading you, but because you had to live with it, because your name was attached to it, because it represented your skill and your integrity. Looking at James now, seeing his 9-year-old curiosity and energy, you understand that he's at the beginning of this same journey. His learning to work, learning to be useful, learning that his contribution to the family's survival matters. His not doing anything essential yet. His mostly helping with small tasks that could be done without him, but is beginning to learn the patterns of work. You watch as he tries to help Eleanor with something, and his enthusiasm leads him to get in the way more than he helps. Eleanor doesn't scold him. She simply redirects him. "Try it this way instead." And he tries again. This is how knowledge is passed down, not through formal instruction, but through doing and failing and being shown again until the knowledge is in the hands, until it becomes natural, until you cannot imagine not knowing how to do this thing that was once so impossible. James is learning about cold, learning about hunger, learning about work, learning about community. These lessons will shape him in ways that modern children rarely experience. He will know, with a certainty that cannot be erased, that survival requires effort, that community matters, that preparation and care prevent disaster. By the afternoon, as the daylight fades, the reality of your physical condition becomes more apparent. Your hands show signs of damage that you don't fully acknowledge. The skin is cracked in places, bleeding slightly. The cracks will eventually form scars, and these scars will be permanent. Your nails have become brittle and dark. Your joints ache constantly, but the ache is just part of existence now, like breathing or like the need to eat. The wind has picked up. You can feel the change in the air. The cold has shifted, become heavier somehow. There's a prediction of snow coming, perhaps tonight or tomorrow. You're not conscious of making this prediction. Your body simply knows it the way an animal knows. You've spent your entire life reading the sky, and the signs are clear. This brings a new set of concerns. Snow is both helpful and harmful. It's helpful because it provides insulation. A layer of snow over your thatch actually helps keep your cottage warmer. It's harmful because accumulating snow can damage the structure if it gets too heavy, because travel becomes difficult, because hunting and gathering become harder. You spend part of the afternoon preparing. You stack extra firewood closer to the cottage door so you don't have to go far in deep snow to gather fuel. You check the animal pen, making sure the shelter is as secure as possible, adding extra straw for insulation. You bring in extra water and store it in containers inside the cottage because you know that if the weather becomes severe, you might not be able to leave for a day or more. These preparations are not dramatic. They are the mundane work of risk management, of trying to minimize the ways that weather can disrupt survival. But they are also exhausting in a way that modern people rarely experience. The mental burden of constant planning, constant concern for what might happen, constant assessment of resources and needs, it doesn't stop. By late afternoon, your body is genuinely tired. Not the mild tiredness of a modern person who has sat in an office all day, but a deep exhaustion that comes from hours of physical work in cold, from mental engagement with problems of survival, from the constant low-level stress of winter. Pause. You sit by the fire with Eleanor and James. The three of you gather close. The warmth from a fire doesn't fully penetrate the cottage. The far corners are still cold, still unpleasant. But here, close to the heat, there is something approaching comfort. James is increasingly drowsy, as children get when they are both warm and fed, however modestly. Eleanor is working on spinning still, but more slowly now, her hands stiff and her movements deliberate. You watch her for a moment, noting again how thin she's gotten. It's not unusual. Most people get thinner during winter, but you've been noticing that Eleanor seems to be losing weight faster than she should be, faster than you're losing it. You could ask her about it, but asking would require acknowledging the possibility that she's not getting enough to eat, which would require dealing with the implications of that, which would mean confronting problems you don't have clear solutions for. So instead, you sit in silence, watching the fire, feeling the weight of everything you carry, the responsibility for this woman and this boy, the knowledge of what the next months will require, the constant awareness that one serious illness or injury could unravel everything you built. This is the price of survival. It's not paid in money or in dramatic sacrifice, but in the accumulated weight of small concerns, small aches, small fears that never quite leave you alone. Eleanor's cough persists. James's thinness troubles you daily. Your own back pain is a constant companion. These small physical realities add up to create a baseline of anxiety that you've learned to live with but which never truly dissipates. As the daylight fades fully into early evening, you hear the sound of the church bell from the village center. It's a simple bell, not large, but its sound carries across the village. The bell marks the hour, tells people when to gather for services, serves as a way to mark time in a world that has no clocks. You're not particularly religious, or rather, you are religious in the way that everyone is in this time, in the way that faith is so woven into the fabric of existence that questioning it will be like questioning gravity. But you know that you'll attend church services on Sunday, and you know that this duty is part of your role in the community. The village church is also the center of community life. It's where you gather to hear announcements from the Lord's representative. It's where you see other people in a context other than work. It's where Eleanor sometimes exchanges information with the other women about herbs and remedies, about child rearing, about the small pieces of knowledge that women have discovered work better than other approaches. But your role in the community extends beyond the church. As someone who works with his hands, as someone with a skill, you have a particular standing in the village. You're not a laborer without a trade. Those people exist lower in the hierarchy. You're not a clerk or a merchant. You're a craftsman, which means people respect you in a particular way. They also resent you sometimes because you earn slightly more than pure laborers, because your work is valued differently. This creates a complex social position. You're part of the community, deeply embedded in it, and yet you're also somewhat set apart by your skill. When the roof of someone else's cottage needs repair, they might come to you. You might charge them in labor or in goods or in future favors. But you might also find that the social expectation is that you will help neighbors in need, which means sometimes you're working without full compensation. There's a person in your village named Robert. He's probably 10 years older than you, and has never been as successful at his work as you have been. Robert is skilled with animals, can handle even the most difficult horses, but his life has always been somewhat precarious. He has a wife and children like you, but his circumstances are more tenuous. His cottage is not as well maintained. His stores are always low at the end of winter. Pause. You know that this winter, Robert's family will struggle more than yours. You've seen how thin his son is, thinner than James, and you know that Robert doesn't have the same trade connections that you have, doesn't have as many people willing to exchange work for his services. There's an unspoken social code about this. You don't give to Robert out of charity. Charity is something done by the church or by lords, not something that neighbors do. But you might share firewood if his supply runs low. You might ensure that Eleanor gives Robert's wife the herbs she needs for her children's ailments. You might find work for Robert, bringing him into your project so he earns something, even if he could do the work yourself. This is not pure kindness. It's enlightened self-interest. If Robert's family becomes completely destitute, they become a burden on the entire community. If Robert dies, his skills are lost. If his children don't survive, the village loses future workers. The community has a vested interest in maintaining everyone at a level above complete disaster. Eleanor understands this social calculus as well as you do. Perhaps better, because women often manage these social networks more actively than men. She exchanges goods with other women. Eggs from her neighbor's chicken for vegetables she's grown. Cloth from her spinning for help with a project that's beyond her ability. She trades remedies and advice. She watches for who is struggling and provides quiet support that never feels like charity because it's embedded in a system of mutual exchange. You should speak with William about his roof, Eleanor mentions as the evening deepens. William is the blacksmith, the person who makes a tool that everyone depends on. His roof is probably leaking somewhere. Most roofs are in autumn, and a blacksmith's wife might pay for roof work with nails or with special tools, things that are more valuable than ordinary payment. You nod, understanding the suggestion. It's not that you need to work. Exactly. You have enough stored to get through the winter. But having a bit of extra trade goods, having favors owed to you, is valuable. It's insurance. It's security in a world where security is fragile. This is how medieval society actually functioned for common people. Not through markets and money. There was some of that, but much less than modern people imagine. Instead, it functioned through networks of obligation and exchange, through community, through an understanding that everyone was embedded in relationships that required both giving and receiving. The status of a skilled craftsman brought responsibilities as well as benefits. Sometimes the Lord would requisition your labor for his own projects. You couldn't refuse. If the Lord needed someone to repair a building on his manor, you went and did the work. You might be paid, or you might not. The payment came from being allowed to live on the land, and from access to the commons that provided grazing and wood. As the evening deepens and the fire begins to burn lower, you think about the week ahead. There are always things to do. There is work you committed to doing for others. There are your own projects and preparations. There is the constant low-level work of survival. But there is also community. There are people depending on you. Yes, but you're also depending on them. Eleanor depends on the village women's knowledge of herbs. James depends on the fact that if something happens to you, the community will help maintain him. You depend on the blacksmith for tools, on the miller for milling your grain, on the priest for spiritual guidance. In a world without government services, without professional emergency responders, without commercial solutions to most problems, community is not optional. It's the foundation that everything else sits on. The sun is now entirely gone, leaving behind a twilight that lasts only a few minutes before darkness claims the evening completely. You've brought in all the water you'll need for the night. You've added extra wood to the fire, not too much. You don't want to waste fuel, but enough to ensure that you can keep the fire alive through the night. Fire maintenance during sleep is a constant concern. You cannot simply let the fire go out and relight it in the morning. The process of lighting a fire takes too much time and energy. So you must keep it alive, which means you'll wake perhaps once or twice during the night to add wood and stir the coals. This is not something anyone particularly enjoys. It means your sleep is interrupted, which means you wake less rested than you would if you could sleep straight through. But this is simply how it is. It is the price of having warmth through the night. Pause. James has already fallen asleep. His small body is sprawled across the sleeping platform, his breathing slow and deep, his young face peaceful in a way that daytime faces rarely are. Children sleep easily in winter. The cold and darkness and limited activity seem to make sleep something that comes naturally rather than something that must be struggled for. Eleanor is still awake, though barely. She set aside her spinning for the night. Her hands are warmed by the fire, and you notice again how fine her fingers are, how delicate her hands look despite all the work they do. She's staring into the fire, the way people do when they are tired but not quite ready to sleep, when their minds are following private thoughts that they don't share. Are you thinking about next winter? You ask quietly. Next winter will bring new challenges. Eleanor will be another year older. James will be another year older, hopefully taller, hopefully stronger, hopefully ready for more responsibility. The world might have changed significantly by then, or it might remain much the same. The future is uncertain in ways that modern people rarely experience. I'm thinking about whether we'll have enough stored, Eleanor says. This is a constant underlying anxiety of the season, whether your preparations will be sufficient. Somewhere in the village, there are probably families who are going to run out of food before spring comes. It happens most years. People get thin toward spring. Some people don't make it. We have enough, you say, but you're not completely certain. The harvest was decent, not amazing. You've rationed carefully, but there's always uncertainty. A fire could destroy your stored food. An illness could make it harder to preserve food properly. Any number of things could go wrong. Eleanor nods, accepting this. There's nothing to do about uncertainty except to accept it, to do what you can to minimize it, and to prepare yourself for the possibility that your careful planning might not be enough. And in some small way, she's prepared. By the spring, she'll have lost weight. She may have gotten more ill. But if luck holds, she and James will have survived. You will have survived. The family will have made it through another winter. You move toward your sleeping platform, bringing with you the knowledge that tomorrow will be much like today. Wake, fire management, rationing, preparation. The weeks ahead will contain thousands of actions like these, actions that have been repeated for generations, actions that will be repeated for generations to come. But before you lie down, you pause for a moment, looking at the small space where your family is gathered. Eleanor is now sleeping too, or nearly so, her breathing becoming regular. James is completely gone, curled on his side, his hand tucked under his cheek. The fire is casting dancing shadows on the walls of the cottage. This is what you've been working toward all day. This moment, this safety, this small space where the cold is held at bay and the people you love are protected. It's not glamorous. It's not something anyone will write songs about. But it's real, and it matters, and it's something you created through your work and your care and your attention. The knowledge of impermanence sits alongside the comfort of now. You know that James will grow, will eventually leave, will have his own struggles and his own small victories. You know that Eleanor will age further, and that the winter will get harder for her each year. You know that you yourself are not young anymore, and that the physical labor you do is becoming progressively more difficult. You know that life is fragile and uncertain, and that death is a real possibility for any of you at any time. Pause. But you also know that you survived so far, that you've learned how to live in a harsh world, that you have skills and knowledge that matter, that your family is dependent on you, and that you are capable of meeting that responsibility, at least so far, at least for now. You lie down on your sleeping platform, feeling the straw mattress compress under your weight. The blanket you pull over yourself is the same blanket you slept under for years. It's worn and thin in places, but it holds warmth reasonably well. The cold is still present, even this close to the fire, but it's not the bitter cold of the night outside. It's manageable. It's survivable. As you lie in the darkness, your mind begins to let go of the day's concerns, begins to settle into the rhythm of evening sleep. Outside, the wind has picked up. You can hear it whistling through the thatch, can hear it pushing against the cottage walls. Snow is probably falling by now, as you predicted. By morning, the landscape will be transformed, at least temporarily. The world will be white and new and full of new challenges. But that is tomorrow's concern. For now, in this darkness, in this small space, there's only the sound of Eleanor's breathing and James's gentle sleep sounds. There is a memory of warmth from the fire, which will persist through your sleep and keep you from the worst of the cold. There is a knowledge that you have done what you could, that you prepared as much as you can prepare, and that the rest is beyond your control. Your breathing slows. The weight of your body becomes heavier. The boundary between waking and sleeping becomes less distinct. Your mind releases the specifics of the day, the roof repair, the preparation of materials, the concern about Eleanor's cough, and settles into something more fundamental. The rhythm of winter, the rhythm of survival, the rhythm that has carried your family through every previous winter and that will, with luck and care and community, carry you through this one as well. As we settle deeper into this story, imagine, if you will, the feeling of cold so complete, so total, that it doesn't even feel cold anymore. It becomes normal. It becomes the baseline against which all sensation is measured. Your fingers are cold, but they're always cold now, so coldness becomes merely one of many sensations rather than something remarkable. Your toes are numb, not painfully numb, because pain requires sensation, and sensation has mostly left them, but simply absent from your conscious experience. By the second week of November, Thomas has settled fully into winter routine. The snow came as predicted, and now there's about 3 inches on the ground, with the temperature dropping further each night. The day temperatures are perhaps in the 20s Fahrenheit, the night temperatures considerably lower. This is not the worst of winter. The worst will come in January and February. But it's cold enough that it's genuinely dangerous, that frostbite is a real possibility, that any extended exposure to the elements could kill. The village has shifted into winter rhythm. The constant labor of the harvest season is over. The fields are dormant. The Lord's demands are reduced. You're not required to work as many days as you were in summer and autumn. This might sound like a relief, and in some ways it is. But it's also concerning because less work for the Lord means less guaranteed income from that source. Thomas has taken on more trade work to compensate. He's working on repairing William the blacksmith's roof. He's helping another villager reinforce his animal pen. He's doing small jobs that earn him payment in goods or in promises of labor exchange. Eleanor is producing thread at an increased rate, trying to manufacture goods that can be traded for more food or fuel. Pause. This is a hustle that underlies medieval life. It's not glamorous, but it's constant. There's always something to sell, something to exchange, some way to generate a bit more security. The church services have started to take on a heavier quality in winter. Father Benedict, the village priest, has begun his sermons on themes of endurance and patience. There's something about winter that makes religion feel more essential. The darkness and cold make people feel close to forces larger than themselves, make them crave the comfort that faith can provide. Eleanor attends every service. You can see her finding peace in the ritual, in the community gathering, in the knowledge that they are all together in this struggle. The church is one of the few buildings that has something approaching real warmth. They maintain a bigger fire than anyone can at home, and a gathering of many bodies in one space add additional warmth. You notice, without explicitly thinking about it, that Eleanor's cough seems slightly better after the church services. It's probably not the church that's helping. It's a warmth, the relative moisture of the air from so many people breathing in one space, the psychological relief of being in community. But the effect is real, and Eleanor's face is slightly less tense when she comes home. One of the things that's hardest to truly understand about medieval winter is how comprehensive the need for rationing was. It wasn't just about not eating when you were hungry. It was about fundamentally restructuring how you ate, how much you ate, and what you ate. By November, the diet of a medieval peasant had shifted significantly from the autumn diet. You were no longer eating fresh vegetables. Most of those were gone by now, eaten or stored in root cellars. You were eating preserved foods, dried peas and beans, stored grain that had been ground into flour and made into bread, preserved meats if you were lucky enough to have killed an animal for winter. Thomas's family had killed one pig in the autumn. The meat has been preserved through a combination of salt curing and smoking. But the meat is rationed carefully. A meal might contain a small piece of this preserved pork, or it might not contain meat at all. The meat has to last until spring. The bread is the main source of calories. This bread is nothing like modern bread. It's dense, dark, made from a mixture of grains that might include rye or barley as well as wheat, depending on what was available at harvest time. The bread has been made throughout the autumn and early winter, but as winter deepens, you have to be careful not to eat it all before the supplies run out. Eleanor has developed a system for rationing the bread. She knows how many loaves she made, knows roughly how many people eat how much, and has calculated how many loaves per week she can allow. She also bakes periodically throughout winter, not constantly, but periodically, to stretch the stores. Each time she bakes, she's making slightly less fresh bread and relying more on the stored grain, but she's also creating a kind of rhythm that makes the rationing feel less severe. Pause. There's not much fresh water from vegetables. You're eating stored vegetables if you have them, or you're not eating fresh vegetables at all. This creates a specific kind of dietary deficiency that's not scurvy, exactly, but a lack of certain nutrients that makes people slightly weaker than they would be in other seasons. Eleanor supplements this with what herbs she has, both for medicinal purposes and for the minimal nutritional value they provide. In the second week of November, Thomas begins what he thinks of as a warmth project. This is an ongoing effort that will consume a significant portion of his winter. It's the systematic preparation and maintenance of everything that relates to heat, what is the single most important fuel for winter survival. Everything else is secondary to ensuring that you have enough wood to maintain a fire through the longest nights. Thomas has been gathering wood since the summer. Any piece of dead wood from a forest, any branch that falls from trees, any scrap from his building projects. This wood has been stacked and left to dry over the autumn. But now, as winter actually arrives, the wood needs to be processed. The larger pieces need to be split into manageable sizes. The wood needs to be stored as closely to the cottage as possible so that retrieving it on cold nights requires minimum exposure to the elements. There's a rhythm to how Thomas approaches this. He works on it methodically, doing a portion of the wood splitting every few days, rather than trying to do it all at once. This spreads the work out and prevents a kind of exhaustion that would come from working intensely at one task. The splitting of wood is genuine work. You take a large piece of wood, place it on a kind of wooden platform that serves as a chopping block, and use an axe to drive a wedge between the wood's grains. The better you understand the wood's grain, the more easily it splits. Thomas has become good at this. He can often predict where a piece of wood will split by looking at it, but it still requires power and precision. By the end of a day of wood splitting, his shoulders and arms are genuinely exhausted. It's not the light fatigue of less demanding work, it's the deep weariness of pushing his body to its limits. But there's also something almost meditative about it. The repetition of the motion, the simple clarity of the goal. Take this large piece of wood and make it into smaller pieces, creates a kind of rhythm that makes it easier to be out in the cold. The work generates heat, which is both literally and symbolically warming. Eleanor watches this process and understands what it means. Thomas is investing in warmth for the winter. Every piece of split wood is a piece of security, a tangible measure of preparation. Pause. As the second week of November draws to a close, Thomas finds himself thinking about things that he doesn't normally have time to contemplate. Not profound philosophical questions, exactly, but practical concerns wrapped in something deeper. His thinking about whether Eleanor will be all right. She's been thinner for longer than usual this year, and her cough troubles him in a way he can't fully articulate. Medieval medicine doesn't really exist in any meaningful sense. There's prayer, there's herbal remedies that might help or might do nothing. There's the knowledge that if Eleanor becomes seriously ill, she might simply die and there's nothing he can do about it. His thinking about James. The boy is growing, but perhaps not growing fast enough. Is he getting enough to eat? Thomas and Eleanor are rationing everything carefully, but is the rationing so severe that it's actually harming James's development? And if so, what can he do about it? He can't create food that doesn't exist. His thinking about the cold itself, about whether this winter will be worse than previous winters or merely equal. There's a kind of folk wisdom about predicting winter severity based on the thickness of animal fur, the early arrival of certain birds, the color of the leaves in autumn. These predictions are more stories than science, but Thomas has learned that they are often accurate, and the signs seem to suggest that this will be a harsh winter. His thinking about the Lord and whether the Lord's demands might shift might become more severe if the weather becomes desperate. The Lord has the power to increase labor demands, to reduce the rations that peasants are permitted to keep for themselves, to requisition goods that have been carefully preserved. The Lord's actions might feel arbitrary, but they are essentially survival instincts. If the Lord's own resources become threatened by a harsh winter, he'll take action to ensure his own security, even if that action harms the peasants. These are not comfortable thoughts, and Thomas doesn't dwell on them for long, but they are present in his mind. They are the constant background radiation of medieval life, the awareness that survival is not guaranteed and that forces beyond your control can shift the conditions of your existence dramatically. At some point during the night, Thomas wakes in the darkness to check the fire, as he does roughly once per night. The room is very cold. The fire has burned down to coals, and he needs to add wood before it dies completely. He moves carefully in the darkness, not wanting to wake Eleanor or James. His feet find the wood stored near the sleeping platform, and he carries an armful of split wood to the fire. The coals are still glowing underneath, still alive, which is good. He places the wood carefully, creating a structure that allows air to flow through but protects the coals from being immediately snuffed out. The fire catches a new wood and begins to build again. Heat radiates from it, and Thomas stands close for a few moments, warming himself. In these quiet minutes, alone except for his sleeping family, the profound nature of what he does becomes apparent. He is literally maintaining the fire that keeps his family alive. Without this fire, the coal would penetrate the cottage completely. Without this warmth, Eleanor's cough might become pneumonia. Without this heat, James's small body would have no refuge from the exterior cold. It's a small action, really. Check the fire, add wood, let it build. But it's also the action that determines whether his family lives or dies. It's the action repeated not just once but many times per night, many times per day, for months at a time. There's something about this that connects to the deepest part of human existence. This is what survival means. Not grand gestures, but the repetition of small, necessary actions. Not the dramatic struggle against an enemy, but the patient management of necessary resources. Thomas stands by the fire for perhaps 5 minutes, until the new wood is caught fully and the flames are substantial enough to last for the next period. Then he returns to his sleeping platform, to Eleanor's warmth, to the continuation of sleep that will allow him to face tomorrow. Pause. And so the night continues. The fire burns. The cold waits outside. The family sleeps. And the slow progression through winter continues its inevitable path. This is medieval survival. Not the dramatic narrative of kings and conquerors, but the quiet persistence of ordinary people who understand their world deeply, who know how to work with conditions they face, who find ways to create meaning and beauty and connection even in difficult seasons. And now, as our time together draws toward a close, as the night deepens toward its end, I want to remind you that the medieval winter, harsh though it was not necessarily a time of complete misery. There were moments of joy. There was laughter. There was a warmth of community, the pleasure of food eaten together, the small victories of successfully maintaining a fire or completing a project. The peasants of medieval Europe were not victims of history. They were not passive recipients of their circumstances. They were people who understood their world deeply, who knew how to work with the conditions they faced, who found ways to create meaning and beauty and connection even in difficult seasons. And their knowledge, their understanding of how to live with the seasons, their acceptance of natural rhythms and natural limits, might be something worth remembering in your own time. In our world of artificial light and controlled temperatures, of abundance that masks the scarcity that previous generations knew intimately, there's a kind of forgetting that has happened. We've forgotten what it means to be truly cold. We've forgotten what it means to wait for spring, to ration carefully, to understand that survival is something that requires attention and work and community. But the medieval peasants knew these things, and in knowing them, in understanding how to navigate a winter that could kill, they developed systems and knowledge and wisdom that allowed not just survival, but the continuation of culture, family, meaning, and beauty. Thomas's family made it through that winter. Eleanor's cough resolved itself by February. James grew strong enough to help with spring planting. The pattern continued. The seasons turned. Life persisted in the face of conditions that seemed almost designed to prevent it. Pause. So as you drift deeper into sleep, as the story of Thomas and Eleanor and James continues without you, as the medieval winter continues its slow progression through the darkness, know that you have witnessed something real. You have seen how humans survive. You have felt, in some small way, what it meant to be a medieval peasant facing the cold. And in that witnessing, in that small understanding, perhaps you have gained something, not knowledge exactly, but a kind of remembering, a recall of something deep in human nature that knows how to persist, how to maintain warmth, how to create community and meaning in the face of difficulty. The medieval winter continues. The story continues. And you, like the peasants of 800 years ago, can rest now, secure in the knowledge that you have done what you could, prepared as well as you could prepare, and that the rest is beyond your control. Your life, in this moment, is safe. You are warm. You are protected from the cold by walls and blankets and the careful management of heat and resources. And that is not something to take for granted. That is something that required, throughout human history, the effort and attention and love of people like Thomas, like Eleanor, like countless others whose names are forgotten but whose knowledge and care persist in the systems we've inherited. Sleep well, knowing that history continues its gentle rhythm. Sleep well, knowing that in this darkness, in this quiet, in this small space, you are safe. Sleep well, knowing that you have survived one more day, and that tomorrow will bring the same opportunities and challenges that yesterday did. Sleep well, knowing that this world, harsh though it may be, is also human. It is also full of love and care and small moments of beauty. It is also the world where people like Eleanor create patterns with needle and thread, where children like James learn and grow, where you yourself rest in the knowledge that warmth persists even in the coldest seasons. The cold will continue outside. The wind will continue to blow. The winter will continue its slow progression through the months ahead. But in this moment, in this darkness, there is only rest. There is only the memory of warmth. There is only the knowledge that you have earned this sleep through your labor, that you have done what needed to be done, and that tomorrow you will do it all again. Sleep now. Rest now. Let the story of this medieval winter continue without you. Continue in the ways that it has continued for 1,000 years, will continue for centuries to come. Sleep now. And in sleeping, join the countless billions who have come before you, who have also felt the weight of winter, who have also found their way through the darkness, who have also discovered that survival is possible, that community matters, that love persists even in the coldest of times. The night is long. You have rested well. And the story of human survival continues, gentle and persistent, through every season, every year, every generation. In the darkness outside, the medieval winter continues. Fires are dying down in cottages across the village. Families are settling into sleep. The rhythm of survival, which has been refined over centuries, continues its ancient pattern. But hey, in this moment, there is only the sound of breathing and wind. There is only the memory of warmth. There is only the profound quiet that comes when all the day's work is done, when all the preparations have been made, when you can finally release your vigilance and trust that you have done enough. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. Let the story fade into dreams. And know that in the darkness, in the cold, in the quiet of the night, you are safe. You are warm. And that is enough. The medieval peasants understood something that modern people have largely forgotten, that survival is a kind of art, a kind of daily practice, a kind of love. It's the love that makes you maintain a fire through the night. It's the art of understanding how systems work and using them to your advantage. It's the daily practice of showing up, of doing what needs to be done, of persisting even when the circumstances seem impossible. And in that persistence, in that commitment to survival with dignity, Thomas and Eleanor and James and countless others like them created the foundation for everything that came after. Every technological advance, every comfort, every luxury of modern life sits on top of the knowledge and effort and sacrifice of people who understood that winter could kill and who did what needed to be done anyway. So sleep now, knowing that you are the heir to that legacy. Sleep knowing that in your body, in your cells, in your deep understanding of what it means to rest after labor, you carry the wisdom of 1,000 generations who survived winters that would terrify us today. Sleep knowing that you are part of a story that is far older than written history, a story of humans persisting in the face of cold, darkness, hunger, and uncertainty. The medieval winter, with all its hardship and all its challenge, was also a season of human triumph. Every morning that someone woke up alive was a small victory. Every meal that stretched the stored food a bit further was a small victory. Every repair that prevented disaster was a small victory. These small victories, repeated day after day, season after season, century after century, built a human world that persists even today. Pause. And now, as the night deepens, as the story of Thomas and Eleanor and James resolves itself into sleep, as a medieval winter continues in the distance, heard but not felt, imagined but not experienced, you can let yourself go. You can release the tension that you've been holding. You can trust that you are safe, that your home is secure, that those you love are protected. The wind continues to blow outside. The cold continues to press against the walls. But hey, in this space, there's only warmth and safety and rest. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and know that tomorrow will come, as it always does. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities. Tomorrow will bring the chance to continue the ancient work of survival and meaning-making that humans have been engaged in since before history began. But tomorrow is not here yet. For now, there is only this moment. There is only this darkness. There is only the gentle rhythm of breathing, the slow beating of your heart, the gradual relaxation of muscle that have carried you through the day. Sleep now, rest well, and know that in sleeping, you honor the legacy of all those who came before, who persisted through their winters so that you could rest in your warmth, safe and protected and at peace. The story of Thomas and Eleanor and James continues in the distance. The medieval winter continues, and you, here in the present, can finally release your vigilance and trust in the safety of this moment. Please like and subscribe our channel. Sleep well.